There is a word used in the corporate world that functions as a polite, sterilized cover for almost every form of prejudice. The word is optics. It's an optics issue. We need to consider the optics. The optics aren't quite aligned with the brand. When a corporate executive talks about optics, they are rarely talking about lighting or camera angles. They are talking about aesthetics. They are talking about the unspoken, highly rigid visual requirements of who is allowed to hold power, who is allowed to be the face of an organization, and who is expected to stay hidden in the back room doing the actual work. My name is Caroline. I am a communications strategist. I am highly educated, fiercely competent, and possess a terrifying memory for data. I am also a size 18. In the world of high-end, boutique corporate public relations, a world obsessed with glossy veneers, tailored suits, and spin, a size 18 body is an anomaly. We are the architects. We are the crisis managers. We are the ones who write the speeches that make CEOs sound like visionaries, but we are very rarely allowed to stand in the light. We are the engine, not the hood ornament. For the first decade of my career, I accepted this dynamic. I didn't just accept it. I built an entire business model around it with my older brother, Tyler. Tyler and I were the co-founders of Marsh Strategic Communications. We started it in a cramped 2-room office in Denver with laptops we bought on credit and a terrifying lack of sleep. The division of labor was clear from day one. Tyler was the front man. He was tall, conventionally handsome, charming, and possessed that specific brand of effortless country club charisma that immediately puts rich, nervous executives at ease. Tyler could sell ice to a glacier. He wore a suit like armor and commanded a room with a handshake. I was the brain. I built the infrastructure. I designed the crisis management protocols, drafted the strategic roadmaps, analyzed the market data, and executed the multi-million-dollar campaigns that Tyler sold. I was the one pulling the all-nighters when a client's stock tanked. I was the one untangling the PR nightmares. We were a perfect machine. Tyler got us in the room. I made sure we owned the room once the door closed. For 5 years, it worked beautifully. We grew from a 2-person operation into a mid-size firm with 20 employees. We moved into a gorgeous, glass-walled office downtown. We were making serious money, and we were making a name for ourselves. I owned 40% of the equity. Tyler owned 60%, which I had agreed to because he had supplied the initial startup capital. But as the firm grew, the culture of the firm began to shift. When you are fighting for survival, competence is the only thing that matters. But when you become successful, the focus shifts to aesthetic. And Tyler, surrounded by wealthy clients and slick competitors, began to slowly, unconsciously buy into his own hype. He became obsessed with the image of Marsh Strategic. He started hiring people who looked a certain way. Young, aggressive, impeccably styled associates who looked great in the boardroom but couldn't draft a crisis brief to save their lives. The crowning achievement of this new hiring philosophy was a man named Preston. Preston was hired as the new VP of Client Relations. Preston looked like an extra from a luxury watch commercial. He had perfect teeth, perfect hair, and absolutely zero original ideas. He was an empty suit. But he looked the part, and Tyler loved him. I ignored the shift. I stayed in my office, managing the actual workload, keeping the clients happy, and letting Tyler and Preston play corporate dress-up. I thought my competence made me bulletproof. After all, I was the co-founder. I was his sister. I built this company with my own 2 hands. I was naive. I underestimated the intoxicating, corrosive power of optics. The breaking point arrived in the form of a massive, industry-defining RFP, request for proposal. A major Dallas-based pharmaceutical company was looking for a new agency of record. It was a multi-million-dollar retainer. Landing this account wouldn't just boost our revenue, it would instantly elevate Marsh Strategic into a Tier 1 national firm. It was the white whale. I spent 4 weeks building the pitch. I worked 80-hour weeks. I built a comprehensive, bulletproof communications architecture that mapped out their next 5 years of product rollouts. I ran the data. I drafted the mock campaigns. It was, without a doubt, the best work of my entire career. It was a masterpiece of corporate strategy. The final presentation was scheduled for a Tuesday in Denver. The Dallas executives, 4 high-level VPs, were flying in to sit in our glass boardroom and hear the pitch. Traditionally, Tyler and I pitched together. He would do the introductions and the vision casting, and then I would take over and walk the clients through the actual strategy, answering the hard questions. That was our rhythm. On Monday morning, 24 hours before the biggest meeting of our lives, Tyler knocked on my office door and closed it behind him. I looked up from my laptop. My desk was covered in binders and printed data sheets. I was exhausted, running on cold brew and adrenaline, but I was ready. "Hey," I said, rubbing my eyes. "The final decks are printed. I'm just reviewing the Q&A prep for the Dallas team. They're going to ask about the FDA compliance pushback in Q2, so we need to make sure we hit the talking points." "Caroline," Tyler interrupted. His voice was too smooth, too practiced. I stopped talking. I looked at him. He was wearing a custom navy suit and shifting his weight slightly from foot to foot. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I've been thinking about the flow for tomorrow," Tyler said, looking out the glass wall of my office toward the bullpen. "I think we need to streamline the presentation, make it punchier, more visually cohesive." "Okay," I said slowly. "I can cut 3 minutes from the rollout timeline if you think it's dragging." "No, the deck is fine," he said. He took a breath. "I think Preston should co-present with me tomorrow instead of you." The room went completely silent. The hum of the air conditioner suddenly sounded incredibly loud. "Preston," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "Preston doesn't know the strategy. He didn't build the architecture. He doesn't know the FDA compliance metrics. He doesn't need to," Tyler said quickly. "He just needs to present the top-line slides. I'll handle the questions." "Tyler, this is my strategy. I built this. And it's brilliant work, Caroline. It really is. You are the engine of this place," Tyler said, adopting the placating, condescending tone he used on difficult clients. "But this Dallas team, they are very traditional corporate players. They respond to a certain type of energy, a certain type of presentation. We need a united, sharp executive front." I stared at him. The puzzle pieces clicked together with sickening speed. "A united, sharp executive front," I echoed softly. "You mean thin? You mean men in tailored suits?" Tyler flinched. "Don't put words in my mouth. It's not about that." "Then what is it about, Tyler?" My voice didn't rise. It actually dropped an octave, becoming cold and incredibly precise. "Explain to me the business logic of putting a man who has worked here for 4 months, who didn't write a single word of this pitch, in front of our biggest potential client, while the co-founder who built the strategy sits in the back." Tyler looked cornered. And when Tyler felt cornered, he defaulted to cold corporate pragmatism. "It's about optics, Caroline," he finally said, the ugly truth spilling out onto the carpet between us. "It's purely aesthetic. You are brilliant, but you don't look like a corporate VP. You don't have the polish that these guys expect to see when they're signing a $3 million check. Preston looks like one of them. He speaks their language. It's just optics. Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally." He was telling me that my size 18 body was a liability. He was telling me that despite the fact that I had built the company, despite the fact that my brain was the only reason we were even in the room with the Dallas executives, I was too fat to be seen in public representing my own work. I looked at my brother, the man I had shared a childhood with. The man I had shared a tiny, cramped office with when we were eating ramen and dreaming of this exact moment. He had let the shiny, superficial world of corporate aesthetics rot his core. "I see," I said. "Caroline, no, I see perfectly, Tyler." I closed my laptop. "You and Preston can present tomorrow." He looked massively relieved, assuming my quiet tone meant compliance. "Thank you. I know this is hard to hear, but it's the right move for the firm." He turned and walked out of my office. He and Preston presented the next day. The Dallas executives loved it. The strategy, my strategy, was flawless. The visual presentation of Tyler and Preston in their matching suits was exactly the optics the pharmaceutical bros wanted. They signed the contract 2 weeks later, and 3 days after the ink dried, Tyler called me into the main conference room. He wasn't alone. He was sitting with the firm's corporate attorney. Because Tyler hadn't just decided I was bad for optics in the pitch room. He had decided I was bad for the optics of the firm permanently. And he had decided to buy me out. The corporate attorney's name was Mark. He slid a thick manila envelope across the polished mahogany table. I didn't open it. I looked at Tyler. He was wearing the same expression he wore when he fired low-level associates who didn't meet their billable hours, a mask of forced clinical sympathy. "Caroline," Tyler said, folding his hands on the table, "the firm is entering a new phase of growth. The Dallas contract changes our entire operational footprint. We need to restructure the executive team to align with our new market positioning." "Restructure," I said softly. "We want to formally buy out your 40% equity stake." The attorney chimed in smoothly. "The termination package is incredibly generous. It includes a 6-month severance, full benefits through the end of the year, and a lump sum payout for your shares." I reached out and opened the envelope. I pulled out the term sheet. I didn't need to read the legalese. My eyes went straight to the valuation number. It was insulting. They had deliberately undervalued the firm, using a creative, highly aggressive accounting methodology that entirely discounted the projected revenue from the newly signed Dallas contract, the contract I had built. They were trying to pay me pennies on the dollar for the empire I had constructed, assuming I would be too emotional to fight them. "Tyler," I said, putting the paper down, "this number is a joke and you know it. It's a fair market valuation based on trailing 12-month revenue." Tyler defended automatically. "Caroline, we're trying to do this amicably. You can take the money, take a long vacation, and figure out your next steps. But the board? There is no board, Tyler. It's just you. I feel that your skill set is no longer the right fit for the direction Marsh Strategic is heading. The direction is superficial. The direction is Preston." I could have screamed. I could have thrown a glass. I could have cried about the betrayal of my own flesh and blood, but crying would have only validated his narrative that I was an emotional, unstable liability. I looked at my brother. I let the silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair. "I am not signing this," I said quietly. "Caroline, be reasonable." "I am being perfectly reasonable," I interrupted, my voice as cold and hard as the glass walls surrounding us. "I am walking out of this building today. You can have the office. You can have Preston. You can have the aesthetic. But you will not steal my equity. You will hear from my attorney regarding the formal valuation dispute by the end of the week." I stood up. I didn't pack up my office. I didn't send a goodbye email to the staff. I simply picked up my laptop, walked out of the glass doors, and took the elevator down to the lobby. I want to be clear about something. I did not spend the next 8 months planning a revenge speech. I did not sit in a dark room plotting the destruction of my brother. I spent 8 months building a better version of my professional life, and the speech emerged from that, the way any genuine insight does, not as a theatrical performance, but as a byproduct of having actually survived the fire. In the first month, I hired a shark of a business attorney. We filed a formal dispute over the equity stake. Tyler's team tried to stall, but we filed a counterproposal that legally locked up the firm's capital distribution until the dispute was settled. It was a slow, grinding war of attrition, but I was not going to let him steal what was mine. In the second month, I quietly launched my own independent consulting firm. I didn't have a glass office or a slick logo. I had a laptop and a dining room table, but I also had my brain. And clients are not stupid. Within 60 days of my departure, 3 of my former clients from Marsh Strategic, a massive regional hospital network, a mid-sized tech company, and a regional bank, terminated their contracts with Tyler and followed me out the door. They had been my relationships. They knew exactly who wrote the strategies that kept them out of the press. They knew where the actual work came from. Combined, those 3 retainer fees exceeded what Tyler had been paying me annually. Tyler was furious. He threatened a non-compete lawsuit, but my attorney politely reminded him that he had terminated my employment without cause and I hadn't signed the severance package, rendering the non-compete void. In months 3 through 7 I built, I expanded. I hired a brilliant junior associate. I gave a guest lecture at the University of Denver on organizational communication during leadership transitions. We recorded it and posted it on LinkedIn. It received 47,000 views in 2 weeks, because the topic resonated deeply with people who had survived corporate restructurings. I was becoming a thought leader. I was visible, and I was doing it in a size 18 body, wearing clothes I liked, refusing to apologize for my physical footprint. And then in month 7, the email arrived. The email was from Dr. Evelyn Okonkwo, the chair of the Corporate Brand and Leadership Association, CBLA. The CBLA Leadership Summit was the premier national conference for our industry. It was the Super Bowl of corporate communications. Thousands of executives attended every year. Dr. Okonkwo's team sent me the summit details: 3,000 registrants, 2,000 seats in the main auditorium. The keynote slot, 9 a.m. main stage, day 1. The slot that every speaker at the CBLA had historically described as the one that defined careers. Dr. Okonkwo had seen my University of Denver lecture. She wanted me to give the keynote. I sat at my dining room table and read the email 3 times. Then I began to write. I started writing in month 7, and I didn't stop until the week before the conference. The speech I wrote was about how organizations systematically fail by optimizing for perception at the expense of actual capability. It was about the documented empirical research on bias in leadership selection. It was about how optics, that specific insidious word, has been used throughout professional history to exclude competence that didn't arrive in an expected package. I never mentioned Tyler by name. I didn't mention Marsh Strategic. I didn't need to. The truth doesn't need to name drop to be devastating. I rehearsed the speech 40 times. I rehearsed it in my apartment. I rehearsed it in front of my associate. I rented a theatrical rehearsal space with an actual stage and a podium because I believed in taking the physical reality of the moment seriously. I timed it with a stopwatch. 31 minutes exactly. I cut 6 minutes of material that I loved because I realized it was self-indulgent. I kept only what was absolutely true. The CBLA Leadership Summit was held at the Colorado Convention Center in downtown Denver on a Thursday in late March. The main stage was a massive, proper conference stage. Raked seating, professional theatrical lighting, 2 massive jumbotron screens flanking the podium displaying the speaker, and a live stream broadcasting to 1,000+ virtual attendees. I arrived at 7 a.m. for the sound check. I wore a midnight blue blazer, custom-tailored, structured, heavy fabric, exactly right. I paired it with wide-leg charcoal trousers and a crisp white silk blouse. I had spent 45 minutes on my hair and makeup, not because I felt the need to perform a corporate aesthetic for anyone, but because I had learned that looking precisely how you intend to look is its own form of armor. Dr. Okonkwo met me backstage. She was a formidable, brilliant woman. She shook my hand, told me she had been following my independent work, and said, "The room is packed, Caroline. They're primed." "Thank you, Evelyn," I said. I found the green room. I sat quietly on a leather sofa for 40 minutes. I drank a glass of water. I went over the opening lines of the speech one final time in my head. I felt a profound, crystal-clear sense of calm. The adrenaline wasn't frantic. It was cold and precise. At 8:47 a.m., the stage manager knocked on the door. 5 minutes, Miss Marsh." I walked to the wings at the side of the stage. The auditorium was a cavern of dark space, illuminated by the glow of the stage lights. The ambient noise of 2,000 executives murmuring and finding their seats sounded like an ocean. I looked out at the front rows. In large conferences, the front 3 rows are always reserved for the major sponsors. Platinum sponsors front left, gold sponsors center, silver sponsors front right. My eyes scanned the silver tier section, and there they were. Marsh Strategic Communications, silver tier sponsor. Tyler and Preston were sitting side by side in the second row. They were wearing matching, impeccably tailored, brand-color navy suits. They were laughing about something, looking relaxed, looking like the masters of the universe, and sitting exactly 2 seats down from them, in the VIP client section, were the 4 VPs from the Dallas pharmaceutical company, the white whale client. The client Tyler had fired me to secure. Tyler was looking at his phone. He had not yet looked at the program. He had no idea who the keynote speaker was. The MC, a booming voice over the PA system, stepped to the microphone. 14 words. "Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker is a leading voice in organizational communications, Caroline Marsh." I took a breath, and I walked out. I walked out into the blinding wash of the stage lights. My heels clicked steadily against the hardwood. My image in the midnight blue blazer, unapologetic, taking up space, flashed across the 2 massive screens flanking the stage. Tyler saw me when I was exactly 6 steps from the podium. I watched his face in my peripheral vision. I have spent 15 years studying facial expressions for a living, analyzing micro-expressions to prep CEOs for hostile press conferences. What I saw in my brother's face in that moment was not guilt. Not yet. Guilt requires reflection. It was pure, unprocessed, absolute shock. It was the expression of a man whose entire mental model of a situation has just been invalidated completely. He had written me off. He had assumed I would shrink away into the background, start a tiny freelance business, and disappear. Seeing me step up to the biggest podium in his industry, broadcast live to thousands, broke his brain for a solid 10 seconds. Preston, sitting next to him, just looked confused. The Dallas pharmaceutical executives looked up at the stage, their faces blank, waiting to be impressed. They didn't know the drama, they just saw the expert. I reached the podium. I placed my hands on the cool acrylic edges. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at 2,000 people. I did not look at Tyler. I didn't need to. I leaned into the mic. "Good morning," I said, my voice echoing through the massive hall. "I want to start by asking you a simple question. How many of you have been in a professional room where someone decided before you spoke, before you demonstrated a single capability, that you simply didn't fit the picture? Raise your hand." A beat of silence, and then a rustle of fabric. Almost every hand in the room went up. Women, minorities, older executives, younger associates, 2,000 people raising their hands in silent agreement. I gave the speech I had been writing for 8 months. It was a 31-minute masterclass. I spoke about the staggering organizational cost of conflating presentation with competence. I cited peer-reviewed research on how aesthetics drive terrible hiring decisions. I told stories anonymized, composited, but painfully real, about brilliant strategists hidden in back rooms while charismatic frontmen tanked client accounts because they couldn't read a dataset. I gave 3 concrete, actionable frameworks for executive leadership teams to audit their own selection processes for perception bias. I was sharp, I was funny. I was devastatingly articulate. I could feel the energy in the room shifting. The audience wasn't just listening, they were leaning forward. They were taking notes. They were captivated by the brain that Tyler Marsh had deemed too fat for optics. As I approached my final minute, I locked my eyes directly on the silver sponsor section. I found the Dallas pharmaceutical executives, and then I let my gaze slide exactly 2 seats over to meet my brother's eyes. "The most expensive mistake an organization can make," I said, my voice dropping an octave, ringing with absolute authority, "is to look at what someone looks like and assume it tells them a single thing about what that person can do." Tyler swallowed hard. "I have spent 15 years in this industry," I concluded, "and I can tell you with absolute certainty, the rooms that make that mistake are getting smaller every single day. The old guard of aesthetics is dying, and the people they dismissed, the people they hid in the back, we are the reason those rooms still have anyone left to call." "Thank you." I stepped back from the podium. The silence lasted for about 2 seconds, and then the room erupted. It was a standing ovation, not polite, scattered applause. It started in the back rows, rippled forward, and consumed the entire convention center. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering. It was the kind of ovation you cannot manufacture with a PR stunt. It was visceral. I stood there for a moment, letting the wave of sound wash over me. I looked at the front row. Tyler was clapping mechanically because everyone around him was clapping, but his face was gray. I smiled, and I walked off the stage 3400 Monomar 40 the aftermath and the note Dr. Okonkwo met me the second I stepped into the wings. She grabbed my hand, beaming. "Caroline, that was magnificent. I have 3 platinum sponsors already asking for your contact information." I spent the next 2 hours in the VIP coffee lounge, fielding introductions. It was a blur of business cards and handshakes. During the mid-morning break, a woman approached me near the espresso machines. It was the lead VP of communications from the Dallas pharmaceutical company, the White Whale. She extended her hand. "Caroline, that keynote was incredible. I have been waiting to hear someone on this stage say exactly that for years." "Thank you," I said smoothly, shaking her hand. She looked around the room, then lowered her voice slightly. "Your strategy frameworks? They felt incredibly tailored to the kind of structural rollout my team is currently facing with the FDA. Tell me, is your independent consultancy currently taking on new primary clients?" I smiled. The kind of smile you only get to use a few times in your life. "I actually have a slot opening up next month," I said. I handed her my sleek, minimalist business card. "Call my office on Monday. We can talk about real strategy." Tyler did not approach me during the conference. I didn't expect him to. He wasn't built for that kind of confrontation. Instead, my phone buzzed at 6:14 p.m. that evening as I was packing my suitcase in my hotel room. It was a text message from him. One single sentence. "That was very good." I read it. I didn't reply that day. I let him sit with the reality of what he had witnessed and what he had lost. I responded 3 days later. By Monday morning, my attorney called me with excellent news. Tyler's legal team had suddenly, miraculously, become considerably more reasonable in the equity negotiations. Within 48 hours of the summit, after watching me command a room of 2,000 industry leaders, Tyler realized that dragging me through a messy, public legal fight was bad for his optics. The new settlement offer valued my 40% stake at the correct, actual number. It was a massive payout. I opened Tyler's text message from Thursday and typed my reply. "Thank you, Tyler. I'll have my attorney send the final equity paperwork on Monday." He replied 4 minutes later, "Understood." That was the entire conversation. We were no longer partners. We were no longer fighting. We were just 2 people who had fundamentally different understandings of what mattered in the world. The Dallas pharmaceutical company signed a 12-month primary retainer with my new firm 4 weeks later. They fired Marsh Strategic quietly, citing a shift in strategic alignment. It was the largest single contract of my independent career, and it instantly legitimized my agency on a national level. But here's the part nobody tells you about winning. The part that doesn't make it into the highlight reel or the LinkedIn post or the conference summary. Winning is quiet. Winning happens at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday when you're sitting in your home office in sweatpants, reviewing a contract, and your dog is asleep under your desk, and you realize, not with a rush of adrenaline, but with a slow, steady warmth like coffee spreading through your chest, that you built this. Not the version of this that someone else approved, not the sanitized, aesthetically acceptable version. The real thing. The whole thing. Built by a woman whose brother told her she was bad for business. I thought about Tyler a lot in those first months, more than I expected to. Not with anger. The anger had a shelf life and it expired somewhere around the third standing ovation I received that year. What remained was something more complicated. Grief, maybe. The specific grief of losing someone who is still alive. Tyler was not dead. Tyler was in Denver, running a firm I had built, with clients I had cultivated, using frameworks I had designed. He was alive and successful and completely unreachable, because the distance between us was no longer geographic. It was philosophical. He had looked at my body and decided it was incompatible with excellence. That is not a disagreement you resolve over Thanksgiving dinner. That is a fundamental fracture in how two people understand the world. I hired my first full-time employee 6 months after the summit. Her name was Danny. She was 26, fresh out of Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism, brilliant, relentless, and, this is relevant, a size 16. She told me in her interview that she had been passed over for 3 agency jobs because, in her words, they wanted someone who looked like a press release. I hired her on the spot, not because of her body, because of her brain, but also because I remembered what it felt like to be the smartest person in a room that didn't want to look at you, and I was building a company where that would never, ever be the criteria. Within a year, my firm, Marsh & Co. Strategic Communications, because I kept the name, because I had earned it, had 7 full-time employees, 14 active clients, and a reputation in the industry for something that Tyler's version of the firm had never possessed: substance. We didn't sell optics. We sold strategy. We sold the thing that actually works when the crisis hits, and the cameras are rolling, and the CEO is sweating through his Tom Ford suit at a press conference. We sold competence. And competence, it turns out, does not have a dress size, the industry noticed. Trade publications wrote about the firm. I was invited to speak at 3 more conferences. Each time I walked onto a stage, I thought about that first time in Denver, the midnight blue blazer, the trembling hands behind the podium, the moment I looked out at 2,000 faces and decided that visibility was not a liability. It was the entire point. Tyler's firm lost 2 more major clients over the following year. I did not poach them. I didn't need to. They came to me because the work spoke, the way work always speaks when it's built on something real instead of something pretty. When the Dallas contract officially renewed for a 2nd year and the ink dried, I didn't gloat. I didn't post a victory lap on LinkedIn. I didn't need to. Instead, I sat at my desk, my new beautiful desk in my new expansive office with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver, and I wrote Tyler a handwritten note on heavy cardstock. I didn't write it to be cruel. I wrote it because I had spent 34 years being his sister, and despite the betrayal, I wasn't entirely done being that, even now. Some bonds survive even the worst fractures. They don't heal the same way. They heal crooked, with scar tissue and visible seams, but they hold. The note said, "Tyler, I hope the firm is well. I am building something I am deeply proud of. I think you will be too, eventually, if you ever find yourself needing a communications framework that doesn't rely entirely on optics. You know exactly where to find me." See, I mailed it to his office. His assistant told me months later that he had framed it and put it on his desk. Not in a drawer, not in a file, on his desk where he could see it every morning when he sat down to work. I chose to believe it meant something. I chose to believe it meant he finally understood the lesson I had tried to teach him in that glass conference room on a Thursday morning in Denver. That the thing he had thrown away, his sister, his partner, the engine behind everything he had built, was not a liability, was never a liability, was, in fact, the single most valuable asset he had ever possessed, and he had let it walk out the door because it didn't photograph the way he wanted. That is the cost of optics. You get a beautiful picture and an empty room. I got the room. The whole room, the standing ovation, the clients, the firm, the reputation, the 7 employees who show up every morning knowing that their worth is measured by their work, not their waistline. Size 18, midnight blue blazer, a standing ovation that shattered the ceiling. That is the story of the most important room I have ever walked into. I walked into it because someone I loved tried to tell me I didn't belong there. They looked at my body and decided it was a liability to their aesthetic. They were wrong. I knew it then, in the quiet of my own office. 2,000 people confirmed it on a Thursday morning in Denver. And the confirmation felt, honestly, exactly the way I expected it to. Like coming home to something I had never truly left. If this story hit you, if you've ever been pushed out, sidelined, or told you didn't fit the image, drop a comment. Tell me your story. I read every single one, usually at midnight with a glass of wine and a dog who doesn't care what I look like. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you in the next one. You're not the optics. You're the strategy. Don't ever forget the difference.